Hi guys, Mr. Davis here. Hope you're well. This is the next one of our sessions on sociology of sport. And this one takes a look at barriers to participation, focusing specifically on the disability group. But before we get into that, just a few knowledge recall questions I'd like you to answer. So if you pause the video here, just make sure you've got an answer down for each of these. Try and do it without looking back through your notes. But obviously, if necessary, then I'd rather you did that than just and wrote nothing at all. So pause the video and let's see what you can come up with. And we'll just go through these one at a time. So discrimination, a definition of discrimination. Key thing is here that you're talking about some sort of action. So it's the unfair treatment of a person or minority group, as opposed to maybe just an opinion, which would be something that you'd consider be prejudice rather than discrimination, which is the kind of the step further where you're actually taking action. It's unfair treatment. Number two, identify the type of discrimination which is obvious and visible. So there's two kind of general types of discrimination. The one which is most obvious and visible is known as overt discrimination. Overt discrimination. So that's things like, for example, verbal racist abuse of a player on the football pitch, something like that. And then probably if you've worked that one out, you should be able to get this one as well. Type of discrimination which is less obvious and hidden, and that is known as covert. So you've got overt discrimination which is obvious, and covert which is hidden or less obvious, and that might be something like not selecting a particular individual on a team or as a captain just purely because of their race or something like that. That would be covert. And then finally, you've got another definition, something we looked at last week, social stratification. Sounds very complicated. You need to be clear on the definitions. Something along the lines of, it's a type of social inequality where society is divided into different levels on the basis of a social characteristic such as wealth or status. So when we looked at it last week, it's to do with that organization or arrangement of people within society based on something like wealth or status, where essentially the high class, wealthier people are at the top and the poorer, lower status people are at the bottom. That's what social stratification is. Okay, so on to today's work. Barriers to participation. Our learner objective is I will learn how barriers can prevent participation in sport, and then we'll also look at the solutions which can be used to help them. And a few key terms I just want you to note down with the definition here. So when we're looking at involvement and participation of sport amongst the disability group, these two phrases are quite important. You've probably heard them before, but they're very relevant to this topic. So integration is where able-bodied and disabled people taking part in the same activity at the same time. So they're doing it together. So an example of that, which I forgot to add on here, is something like the London Marathon, where they obviously the elite races are separate, but the actual main event, if you like the main marathon, is something that able-bodied and disabled people take part in at the same time. That's an example of integration. The opposite of that is segregation, where people with disabilities participate separately amongst themselves. So for example, the Paralympics. So it's not that one is better than the other. Each one might have some advantages over the other one, but both are potentially useful in terms of increasing participation, because one of the kind of the overriding concepts here is that people with disabilities participate in far less sport than able-bodied people. Even after things like the London Olympics, where so much hype was and so much effort was put into increasing participation amongst a load of minority groups in sport, the numbers of people actually taking part amongst disabled people actually went down after the London Olympics. So that kind of positive spin-off from the Olympics didn't actually happen. And for one reason or another, the numbers actually started to fall down. And so that's something that we're going to look at in a little bit more detail later on. Okay, also worth just noting here, which isn't on the screen, but you've got different types of disabled groups, and it's important that you're aware of what those different groups are. So just have a think for a second. When you think of disabled people, what are the maybe the different types of disability that people can actually have? So in simple terms, you could split it into 3 categories. So you can have physical disabilities. So for instance, if someone has lost a limb and is maybe taking part with one leg or one arm, that would be obviously a physical disability. Sensory disabilities. So sensories might be to do, for instance, if they have a hearing or a visual impairment, and then obviously they have to deal with that when they're playing sport. And then the other one is a sort of mental disability. So if they've got some sort of significant cognitive issues, or they've got some sort of learning disability that would affect their participation. So just make a note of that, because that's something that you just got to be clear on. Not because you're necessarily going to get asked a question about it, but more because when you're looking at the overall topic and you're looking at particularly like the solutions, it's important that you are aware of the different things that people have to deal with in terms of disability sport. So you've got physical disability, sensory disability, and mental disability. Okay, so on to the meat of what we're doing today, which is initially the barriers. So the barriers to participation. So before I go through a few, just take a minute to pause the video and have a think for yourself. Try and make a little list of some of the barriers that you think disabled people, not just at an elite level, but right from the kind of grassroots at the everyday individual, what sort of barriers to participation might they face? Now, some of these barriers are actually kind of generic across different groups who might struggle with participating regularly in sport. So if you're running short of ideas, have a think about some of those other groups and some of the key barriers that they might struggle to overcome in order to participate regularly in sport. See if you can make a list, aim to come up with 5 or 6 before we then crack on, and I'll give you a bit of information about some of the ones that you need to be aware of. So just pause the video here, really give it a good think, and take some time to consider what might be the different barriers to participation for disabled people. Okay, so I've done this in a sort of cryptic way, so it's not a case of copying stuff down. You really need to pay attention, and I'm going to obviously explain what each image is. And then from there, you need to add these to your list of things that you've already got. And throughout this, I've added in various links to videos and a few articles that I want you to take the time to read. If you just do this in 5 minutes and fizz through and make a quick list, you're not going to get as much out of this as I really want you to. So I haven't added any exam questions or anything for today. I really want you to engage with it and get a real good sense of what the barriers are, and appreciate the sorts of things that disabled people have to deal with in terms of their participation. Some of it is unbelievable in terms of like the inspiration. I've got lost with how many videos I've been watching over the last few days to put this little presentation together. But do invest the time into watching the videos in full, because it's just amazing, some of the things that you'll see. So with the first one, we'll just get cracking. So add these onto your list. Common barriers. So the first one is maybe if they've got a negative self-image or a lack of confidence. So if you are feeling like you're inferior for whatever reason, whatever disability you have, a negative self-image and a lack of confidence is likely to prevent you from wanting to participate regularly in sporting activities. The second one would be relatively low income levels, or maybe the cost of participation, such as membership and transport costs and that sort of thing. So just the financial aspect of participating is likely to be quite prohibitive for lots of people who suffer with some form of disability. So I think the key one there is just the cost of participation is likely to be far more significant for someone with a disability than it may be for, I don't like this phrase, but an able-bodied athlete. And the next one, issues to do with access. So if there's a lack of access into and around the facilities, so for instance, no ramps to get in, or too many stairs that they have to deal with, like most new buildings, in fact all new buildings, have to cover certain guidelines now where they those sorts of things aren't an issue, but there are still some old buildings where that sort of thing it remains a significant barrier, either getting in to the building, or once, if they are able to get in, things like narrow corridors, or like even just the front desk. If the front desk is pitched a bit high when you go into like the reception of a leisure centre, it's just a little bit awkward and a bit difficult for someone who might be in a wheelchair, for instance. So yeah, the lack of access and in and around facilities can make it quite difficult. The next one is to do with just a general lack of organised programs. So even if someone is able to access in terms of get into the building, it's unlikely that there's going to be a wide range of activities on offer for various different disability groups. When you think of the range of disabilities that people can have, it's not likely that a leisure centre is going to have multiple different sessions on offer for people in wheelchairs or people with visual or hearing impairments, because essentially they're private businesses that are aiming to make a profit, and you're not going to get a large number of people, if any, coming regularly to that sort of session. So they're going to cater for numbers rather than specific individuals. So just that lack of organised programs, of whether it's to do with just an open session which you might be able to drop into, or organised coaching sessions or competitions. There's a limited number of organised programs and events that people with disabilities can take part in. So straight away, that's an obvious barrier. Okay, the next one is to do with the low media coverage, and that's directly linked in with the role models, or the lack of role models that might be kind of promoted to inspire people who have got disabilities. There's going to be a lack of information available to disabled people. If within the media so much information is made available to able-bodied people about events that are taking place, competitions, results, huge major national and international events, but that's not necessarily something that's mirrored within disability sport, and that lack of information is going to be a significant barrier for people with disabilities, because they're just not going to feel like they can engage with that sort of thing. Equally, the lack of specialist equipment, that's going to be an obvious barrier to participation. If there's not equipment available for you, like readily available, or if it costs too much to be able to get it, that's going to prevent you from taking part in regular sport. So even if you're able to access facilities, equipment is often going to be quite expensive, either for you individually to purchase, or the leisure centre or the gym or whatever it might be might not have that adapted specialist equipment for you. Sorry, before I get onto that, the other one on that one is maybe just the lack of specialist coaches. And I can't emphasize this enough, like however good a coach you might be in, again, horrible phrase, but this able-bodied sport. I'm quite a good tennis coach, but I wouldn't know where to start if I had an individual come in a wheelchair. The rules are different of the game. The movement and the techniques are different, and it would be difficult for me to coach someone at a decent level without that knowledge and expertise and understanding of what's required in the game that they're going to play. So a lack of specialist sports coaches, there's just not as many coaches available with that knowledge and understanding, either at a low level or even at an elite level. It's not such a wide range available, and that's going to impact on participation levels. Then the final one is the myths and the stereotypes of like the capabilities of people with disabilities. It's just a general expectation within society that if you've got a disability, maybe you're not able to take part in sport. It's too dangerous for you. The demands of the game are just too much, and how will you ever manage to participate alongside able-bodied people? It's essentially a myth, because there's so much available out there now to showcase the quality that various different disabled athletes have. But is that information and that knowledge so widely spread that it's not an issue? No, it's not. It is an issue. It is a barrier. So the myths and the stereotypes attached to the capabilities of disabled individuals. And on this one, there's more videos and things coming up, but this is the one which I could watch this video all day long. It's brilliant. So just spend a bit of time, click on the link there. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to take additional notes, as long as you've got the different barriers noted down there. It's more just to kind of develop your overall understanding of the topic. But yeah, just enjoy the video. It's brilliant. It's not very long. And then once you've watched it once or twice, just come back to the next bit of the presentation and we'll kick on from there. So we come next to the solution. So you've got a range of different barriers specific to the disability group. But then for each of those barriers, you need to be aware of a potential solution that could be implemented to try and decrease the effects of the barriers for people with disabilities. So amongst other things, we're just going to run through a range of them here. And like I say, there's more videos and things attached to this bit, because I really want you to get an understanding of each thing individually. So the first one is simply just the more opportunities for disabled athletes to participate and progress into kind of more successful and potentially elite level disability sport. So it's opportunities which help potentially talented athletes reach the highest levels, i.e. like the Paralympics. So this is the image of the Paralympics. And because I was curious, I looked at it and I thought, oh, what's that actually about? So just take a minute just to read through this short bit. Yeah, it's just from the internet, but hopefully it's nice. It just gives you a little understanding of what that image is based around. And then once you've done that, just click on the video again underneath and just spend a few minutes watching that video. It just gives you a nice idea of what goes on in the Paralympics. It's not one of the key things, and you'll see this, I think, in an article that comes up shortly. It's not just about the Paralympics. I think there's a phrase that comes up shortly to do with disabled people should be allowed to be rubbish at sport, something along the lines there. Sounds a bit odd, but it's that concept that it shouldn't just be about elite level Paralympians in terms of disability sport. It should just be about the everyday individual that has a disability that should still be able to participate in some form of sport. Just because they're not an elite level performer, that should still be available to them. But anyway, we'll get to that one. So yeah, this is the first one, providing more opportunities for success, particularly for those talented athletes. So there's a progression pathway through into elite level sport. It didn't always used to be like that. Obviously, for able-bodied performers, there's often and it continues to a growing pathway and network through to high-level sport, but that's certainly not been the case. Not as smooth a pathway anyway for disabled athletes. Right, then we get through a few here. So the next one is just to do with increased investment in disabled sport. So it subsidizes it and makes it more affordable to people. And again, there's just a little article that I want you to read here, just to really broaden your understanding of what that actually means and the impact that investment in disabled sport can actually have in terms of it being a solution to some of the barriers that exist. So again, take a minute just to read through the article. If you want to make a few notes from it, then that's great, but it's more just to give you a good understanding of the relevance of that solution. Right, the next one is split into two. So the first one is just to do with improved transport. So improved transport to the facility. So whether that's a sort of organized system where a minibus might go around and collect people within the community to enable them to get to the facilities, or whether it's just public transport where individuals, for example, wheelchair users, but it could be anyone, and the time and investment has gone into making sure that those sorts of whether it's ramps or whether it's specialized facilities on trains and buses and things like that make it a more comfortable journey for someone with a disability to actually make sure that they can actually use it without any kind of level of discomfort. And the obvious one here, but potentially one that's forgotten, is just the kind of the ease of access. So whilst we said it was a potential barrier previously, things have improved, and that's a key thing with if you're struggling for ideas about solutions and the kind of the way that this works. In basic terms, there's a problem because previously that sort of thing had made it an obvious barrier for someone, for instance, in a wheelchair. But and it sounds quite simplistic, it's getting better. It's not perfect. So if you were asked to evaluate these things, then that you need to kind of tag that on there and go into detail about why that is. But in simple terms, it used to be bad, it's getting better, but it's not quite there yet. And in terms of it getting better, the improvement in terms of access with ramps, wider corridors, lifts and things like that mean that it's easier to access and to navigate through a facility, partly because specialist architects and people to do with planning have actually made sure that the facilities are inclusive of for everyone, regardless of what your disability or issue is. So next one, improvement in technology. So for instance, get to that, whether it's to do with prosthetics, wheelchairs, or just like the facilities that might be available. So for instance, here you can see it's like a specialist thing that allows someone in a wheelchair to be kind of lowered into the pool. Swimming pools are often designed now, like new swimming pools are often designed where at very least one edge is kind of sloped. So new swimming pools are not quite as basic as like a bathtub where it's just a drop in. They're often sloped entry into the pool, certainly at least a one edge, and that's just to make it far more straightforward for individuals with disabilities, obviously specifically wheelchairs, but it could be others as well. So that's something to think about, the improvement in technology and facilities. Right, the next one. So we said that media coverage wasn't great. However, it's getting better. There's an increase in media coverage. You've probably seen some of these things on TV and seen the promotion of it. And again, with media coverage, it's always linked closely to to role models. And whilst you might not know the names of these individuals, you probably recognize one or two of them from having seen them kind of widely publicized. And with this, there's another video which is it's just a short one, but it's just brilliant. It just highlights like the incredible level of performance that that these athletes are capable of. So yeah, enjoy that one. Pause this video and just make sure that you watch that. Maybe watch it a few times. It's brilliant. And the next one, oh well, this is to do with the technology again. I think yeah. So sorry, this one on the left was to do with the facilities and things, and then this one is to do with the prosthetics. So the prosthetics are things like essentially like replacements of limbs. I think, yeah, there's another video for this one as well. This one, it goes off a little bit on a tangent, but it's just an incredible story of how a guy has essentially put together his own prosthetic limbs following an accident. You're not going to get asked a question about or anything, but again, it's just broadening your awareness of the topic overall and appreciating how unless you really engage with the topic, you're not likely to remember a lot of this. But if you really take the time to watch these videos, not just the ones on here, but go through a few of them, it's amazing. So last few, I haven't done this on one by one, they're all up there. So this one here top left is to do with training of coaches. So again, like, there's not that many specialist sports coaches, but there's more than there were. And there's like a network of specialist sports coaches now that are getting built up for different and specific types of disability attached to clubs, not just at an elite level, but lower down, to make sure that there's a kind of a wider level of participation amongst people with disabilities. So the coaches get specialist training, and then they are enabling more people to actually engage with the sport. The top middle here is to do with educating people about the myths and the stereotypes. So again, it's highlighted as a barrier, the stereotypes and the myths. But in order to overcome that, the most powerful thing that you can do is educate people, educating people about the myths and stereotypes, about the capabilities, and challenging people's poor or inappropriate attitudes. So one of the video is actually a TED Talk. Take the time to listen to it. It's brilliant. Again, it's not about exam answers directly. It's about understanding the topic that we're looking at, and I'd rather you spend 10 minutes, 15 minutes looking at that and really digesting what it's all about. It's not just this topic shouldn't just be about exam answers. It's about appreciating a much, much bigger kind of topic within society. And if you understand that, you're more likely to then be able to answer particularly the bigger questions in the exam. So yeah, enjoy the TED Talk. It's a bit of an eye-opener, and it's a good watch. And then when you do come back to it, penultimate one, top right, so designated specific adapted activity. So this one is called goalball. The video shows a goalball match in the Olympics. You don't have to watch it all, but watch a little bit of it just to get an idea of what goalball is. You could see, like, it looks quite good fun. I'd quite like to play that in the sports hall. But yeah, it's an adapted game specifically for individuals with visual impairment. And that's one of the solutions that you could have. So, there might be certain games where individuals with disabilities struggle. So what's the solution? Well, you make different games up. You have different games, and this one is now widely played. There's another game called Boccia. You might have heard of that. If you've not sure how that's played, then again, just Google it. It's called Boccia, Boccia, Boccia. Worth having a look at that. Equally, there are some activities and some games which has just been slightly adapted. So it's not a completely new game, but just things like wheelchair tennis and wheelchair basketball have adapted rules that make it suitable or more accessible for individuals with disabilities in a wheelchair. So it's the introduction of new games like goalball and boccia, but also the adaptation of existing games like wheelchair tennis and wheelchair basketball that make it more inclusive. And then finally, we've got the work of specialist organisations. So Sport England, which is an organisation that deals with a lot of funding and distribution of money, but also monitoring participation levels and not just generally, but really detailed participation levels across different groups. There's another group called Activity Alliance, which I think is what the video focuses on. But it's not about the specific details of it. It's just about the general understanding that there are now specialist organisations that work with and support and coordinate the development of sporting opportunities for individuals with disabilities, whether it's young individuals or older people. The overall idea is that you're trying to boost participation levels across everyone, including people with disabilities. So that's it in terms of the presentation. Hopefully you've taken the time to look back through the videos. There might be some other articles and videos that you want to research. If there are, and you find something good, then send them my way and I can share it with other people. But hopefully that's been a nice watch for you. And tomorrow's lesson, we'll just drop back in with some exam questions just to sort of test your knowledge of what you've picked up today. Okay, guys, take it easy. Bye-bye.